our own students right here, and the way they're beginning to think so critically about what it means to get a Duke education in particular. Like DSG's wonderful work on the intellectual climate. And the Chronicle did a great job. Do we have any people from the Chronicle today here? Chronicle did a great job of covering the intellectual climate report, dissolving the classroom walls. Now, the Chronicle editorials have been rocking education. Here's one I like. Empty credentials stifle intellectualism. One Bill Wright Swindell probably likes. Through the career view mirror. And my favorite of all time Chronicle editorial is Step Back from the Buffet Baby. I really like that whole notion of a lot of times we treat education as a buffet. And we need to think about that in more intentional ways. So, I think today, it's a really exciting time to be a student, be a faculty member at Duke University. And even better than that, it's exciting to have a leader as the Dean of Arts and Sciences who really gets it, who knows why it's important to think about this question of stepping back from the buffet. And we're fortunate to have that leader with us today to help us explore these issues. Professor of Religion and Dean of Arts and Sciences, Laurie Patton. I want to throw out an analogy before Laurie talks. And that is, in my mind, I really believe this. Here on our campus, Laurie Patton is to liberal arts as Coach K is to basketball. I think that's fair. She has taken it to the hoop of undergraduate education every day. And from now on, we're going to refer to her as the dean who's got game. Now, in all seriousness, Laurie is out in front. She's thinking proactively about these issues, and she's thinking about ways that higher education is being transformed and what the impact of that is going to be on all of us. So I want to thank you for joining us. We've asked her here today to help us think about a particular issue, and that is the issue of connected knowing and integrative learning. Now, I think we're all aware that we hear this narrative that goes something like this. Duke students are great planners of experiences, they're great doers of experiences, and they're great collectors of experiences. However, Duke students are not that great at reflecting on experiences, on connecting experiences, and on integrating experiences. I think we all agree that a liberal arts education is much more than a collection of individual parts. And we've asked Dean Patton today to help us think about that. Mark?
Thank you. There are people trying to get in. If the students could move forward and create a little get through here, then I know there are people way back there trying to get in and sit in front.
There's one more seat up here.
Feel free to come through.
And any folks that, and these are all service learning folks, so they're kind of right there. I mean, they're going to be moving around.
Okay, has pathway been created?
Here we go.
There's
Thank you, Emily.
So, David, thank you so much, and I'm kind of blown away that there are so many people here today. I'm thrilled for the opportunity for this conversation for any number of reasons. The first thing that I'll say before I begin with some of my more reflective remarks is something a little off. Do this in undergraduate classrooms as well as graduate classrooms is the following thing. And it's a really simple question, which is, and I'd love to just hear from you before I begin to talk, whether any of you have an answer. And I'm going to give you my answer as an example before I throw it out, which is, what's your question? What's the question that you will never answer for the rest of your life, but you will never get tired of asking? And my question, just so you know, there's not a what am I thinking sort of thing going on here, is what's the nature of poetic inspiration and how does it fit into the world? That's my question. I've written books, edited books, articles, you name it. I will never tire of asking that question, and I'll never answer it. But that's my question. Anybody else? What's your question?
How does the world work?
How does the world work? Okay.
How do people change their mind?
How do people change their mind?
What's necessary for us to get along together?
What's necessary for us to get along together?
Just how do we create more justice out there?
How do we create more justice? So those are questions that my guess is, I noticed expressions on each of your faces. I want some men in this game, by the way. That was an expression of delight and happiness because you all are never going to get tired of asking that question, I can tell. That is a question that so fascinates you that no matter where you land and what you do with your life, no matter what career you choose and what major you decide to focus on, that will be the question that you will be thinking about for the rest of your life. And I think that is one of my definitions of what integration is. So as David most wonderfully articulated for us, I think one of the biggest challenges for a top 10 liberal arts undergraduate education is integration. I have two other challenges that I talk about all the time. We're not going to focus on those as much today. And that is adaptation and innovation. And those are key things. We can have a whole, you guys look like you're really into this, so we could have a whole other lunch on innovation. We could have another one on adaptation. Tuna sandwiches are great, so I'm very happy with that. But integration, I think, is probably closest to my heart because of the conversations that I have with students almost every day. And I'm very interested in student experience as well as the faculty experience and the graduate student experience around this question. So the way I put it is the following. We have reaped untoward benefits because of specialized knowledge. Every single one of you here has been more influenced in your life by specialized knowledge than anybody was even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And it doesn't matter what your field is, that's the case. And we've also reaped untoward economic benefits as a result. Perfect example, our office just went green. I'm really proud of everyone. We have a Dean's Green Team now. And it's a wonderful, we have a website, it's a wonderful initiative. We're going to be carbon neutral in all our travel. It's going to be wonderful. And I am able to write a blog. My first blog was just turn off your lights, let's get going, guys. My second blog is going to be about what does it mean to be green in a really old building that everyone's giving up on, like the Allen building. And I'm able to call facilities and maintenance and ask them what the specific issues are around being green in an old building. And they will be able to send me 10 graphs around window insulation and all that kind of stuff within an hour. That will help me write my blog. That is a kind of daily experience that I have that wouldn't have been possible even 10 years ago, and certainly wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago. So that's an example, and we're going to save, let me just be really direct about this, we're going to save $250,000 if we do our green work better. And so there's a direct, immediate economic benefit for that level of specialized knowledge in a department that we don't even think about as an academic department. By the way, the FMD people are incredibly smart at Duke, and that's one of the reasons why we can save the energy we can. So that's that's an example from yesterday. So I think the key for us is that there's also a kind of vertigo, almost dizziness, attached to specialized knowledge for each one of us, which is how deep do I have to go in order to know what I need to know, and then when I look up to figure out how my knowledge fits into the world, that's where I'm not going to see expressions of happiness and delight on your faces. There's a kind of anxiety, and David was talking about this in a beautiful way, that I experience daily from the people I talk to about what is it that makes my knowledge fit into the world? How can I be an agent of making my knowledge persuasive in the world? And what can I do to make sure that there is a place for people who come after me? And those are really important questions that I think we're not as good at doing. And we're not as good at answering those questions. So let me give you some Duke stories to talk a little bit about what I see on this campus, and then throw out some ideas of things that I'd love to work on in the next few years to continue to make those connections. And then we'll open it up. And I hate to do this because I'd much rather be here, but I have to appear before the Promotions and Tenure Committee at 11:15, what my wonderful colleague Angie Oran calls the star chamber. And I do have to defend a case, so I can't be late. That's what I do. We have a hard stop. And the schmooze factor, which is the best part of all of this, is going to have to happen. Or maybe we can end a little early.
Yeah.
in
What
the
time do you have
conversation.
to leave?
I have to be right at 1.
Right at 1.
Okay, so I'll try and be brief, and then we can open up to conversation and go from there. So, I'm thinking about a conversation I had at the scholarship dinner last year. I sat next to someone who was, this is the dinner where people who are getting scholarships, maybe some of you have been at it, and the people who are getting scholarships get together. And it's a fabulous dinner where everyone's hanging out, having a great time. And you get to hear people speak about why their scholarship matters to them and the difference it makes in the world. And I was sitting next to someone who was getting an oncology scholarship because he was interested in going to medical school and studying cancer. Why was he interested in doing this? Because of several deaths from cancer in his family, and the same with a donor. So they had an incredible bond, and I think that's a really very moving thing to be with them. And as we were talking, he said, well, I'm actually a double major. And I said, what kind of double major? He said, I'm also a religion major. That was just happenstance. I'm a religion scholar, but just happenstance. And I said, well, what do you do in your work on? And this is what I call a Duke moment, which is when you're just so amazed that you could be in a place where many of your educational dreams can actually come true. And I'm so amazed that someone like this actually was working on the things he's working on. He said, well, I'm interested in early Puritan New England. And I said, well, that's great, and I'm doing a senior thesis on that. I said, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me more about that. And he said, well, and I thought he was going to say something about the way that Puritans settled into America and some of the economic challenges they might have faced in relationship to that religion. Something a little more general. He said, no, I'm looking at Calvin's Institutes, which are the foundational texts, and how Cotton Mather used them to create healing protocols in the colonies for smallpox. And I went, oh, that's kind of a cool topic. I happen to grow up in New England. I happen to know a little bit about this, so we began to engage on that question. And then I asked the question that I ask a lot of students, which is, if you could put the things that you do together, if you could put oncology research, biology research, medical school, and your research into early Puritan New England, what would you do? And every time I ask this question, and it has not failed, no Duke student has said, I don't know. Every Duke student I know has lit up in the way when I asked each of you your question. And by the way, your assignment is, as you leave this room, if you don't have an answer to what is your question, you need to work on that this year. And by the time you finish your classes this year, you need to have a clear sense of what the question is, because every single one of you has one. So when I asked him this question, he said, well, he lit up, and he said, what I'd really love to do is actually take all of the Puritan writing that I know of, in addition to Cotton Mather, and figure out what the relationship was between the leading Puritan thinkers and every single healing protocol that I have seen written up in the Puritan manuals. And he just really wanted to do this. You could just tell. And so it was one of those moments where I thought, wow, it's a wonderful opportunity. 86% of Duke students do two things. Many of them are double majors, and that reflects a trend in the elite colleges, for sure. But there are a lot of other reasons for those two things. It can be Duke engaged, it can be a major and a minor, it can be 2 minors. I think the one that I heard was a double major, 2 minors, and 3 Duke engages. I thought, great, and it is great. I didn't meet that student. I want to meet that student, and I want to ask that student, what would you do if you put it all together? Where is your question that unites all of them? And I can't wait for that student's answer. I'm sure there will be one. So that's where there's a kind of excitement and engagement, but it's also the anxiety, because when we even move from pre-major to majors at Duke, when we move out into the world after we graduate or into graduate school, we have a set of accumulated experiences, and that's phenomenal, that's transformational. But what is the point of the accumulation? Why add it when the challenge for us is to put it all together? And I think that we need to develop more experiences to do that. I'm going to tell you a few stories of folks that I have met that seem to be doing that. And then I'd like to throw out some thoughts I have about what we might work on together for the future, what we're working on now, as well as what we might work on together for the future, for finding ways to do that. We had a graduate in the 2001-2002 who was in medical school, and he was also a photographer and an artist. And so he decided to go to med school, but he never lost his passion for art. His particular work now is in finding the genetic codes and making better sense of the genetic codes that lead to Down syndrome. Why is he interested in this? Because his beloved sister has Down syndrome, and he spent most of his life photographing her and his family together. So what has he done? He's continuing to work on that genetic research and also created a foundation for families to work together, families who have children with Down syndrome in the families, to work together through art to create better relationships in the family. That's what he's doing. Now, that is a perfect example of exactly that kind of integrative moment. Now, did he spring full grown into, I'm going to do this? No, of course not. He didn't do that at all. He found his way forward. He knew that he couldn't forget the art as he moved forward with his medical research. And as a result, realized that what he could do with the untoward economic benefits that he gained from his specialized knowledge to create something that integrated his question. Because his question is, how do we live better with Down syndrome? His question is even more specific than that, which is, how do families live better with Down syndrome? And he will never tire of asking that question. But he found a way to put it all together. Now, I'm very aware that as I tell you this story, I'm thinking, oh no, now we're going to have a bunch of essays coming in from our applicant pool, or even as we continue to think about this with Duke students, where, by the way, I'm integrated, and let me tell you the 10 ways I'm already integrated. Bing? Please don't make this a question of achievement. It is not a question of achievement. It is a question of what we are meant to do with our lives, which is create value. Value can be economic. Value has to be also transformational and personal and community-based. So, another example is a wonderful example of Bridget Cook, who some of you may know. She graduated several years ago and was in econ and film, put econ and film together in her work at life, work with Duke. And what did she do with that? Well, she originally started to go into finance. I had a wonderful conversation with an undergraduate the other day. Why are so many people working, Duke grads who are working in nonprofits, love thinking about nonprofits, suddenly switching gears and going into finance? I'll do it for a little while, and then I'll go back to the nonprofit, I need the money, all incredibly important reasons, right? So if we disrespect those reasons, we're going to be in trouble. But that's what she decided to do, and then she decided, no, I really can't let go of film. I have to continue to do film. So what did she do? She took the money that she earned in finance, wasn't a lot, and decided to make a documentary with some support on women who were recipients of microlending. And she did a wonderful documentary that involved economic commentary. And what is she doing now? She's working with a group of venture capitalists to fund specific apps for women to receive the funding on their phones so that they can get the money without the middle person. And it's actually changing the structure of microlending in very small ways in certain parts of South India. So there's some wonderful examples of how she, in every part of her life since she graduated, has found a way to integrate. I think the most important thing that I have learned in talking to people about some of these really inspiring examples is that I think for liberal arts education 50 years ago, integration was taken for granted. It was simply what we did because we were creating a certain kind of person. Even with all of the cool education that happened with the GI Bill, and where so much was vibrant because so many people wanted to learn, even there, education as a form of integration was taken for granted in the sense that folks were being integrated back into productive modes of society, as well as becoming integrated human beings. I don't think we exist in a moment where integration is taken for granted now. I think it's one of the hardest things that we have to do, and it used to be one of the easiest things. It's hard because it's not part of our daily life. We have to stop and figure out what integration looks like. We have to ask the question deliberately because it's not part of our class structure, right? We have a really wonderful curriculum. There are things that we need to do to push and pull and make it better, and we're going to continue to work on that. But that big question, which is the aims of that matrix, the aims of the skills and the areas and all of those things, is something that all of us need to ask better together. And there's no time in the day, literally, for us to do that. So that's one of the things that I worry about a lot, because it used to be part and parcel of what we did. It used to be a natural moment of reflection for us, and now it's not. It is an unnatural moment of reflection for us, and we need to do better at making it more natural again. So I have a couple of thoughts about how we might do this better. One of the things that I have noticed is that there tends to be a break for folks between the pre-major and the major parts of their lives at Duke. And a little bit of scariness, a little bit of anxiety. Partly because one of the things I really worry about, and this has a lot to do with the integration of the major at Duke, I worry about the stigmatization of majors, right? So as I'm listening to the headlines about whether you get a degree in, what was it, Aristotle or aerospace engineering, why are we making the choice, right? What is it about our society that the choice is such a stark contrast, number one? See what I mean about it no longer being natural? We're now in a world where discourse is framed where there are these stark contrasts. And it's up to us to say, hang on a second, why does there have to be a choice? We have to make that argument. That argument is not made for us in the media. And yet, that's where we need to live our lives. And I think that part of the anxiety around moving from the pre-major to the major has to do with the major as career choice. What will it take for us as individuals to say, yes, a major is part of thinking about a career, but no, a major is not only that. Because if we say that a major is only that, then we might as well be thinking in a very different way about what we do when we begin college. We could go to a British system where we declare our track and intention when we're 17 or 18. And we wake up when we're 50 and realize that our knowledge isn't actually what we wanted it to be. I think there's a very interesting thing that is emerging as a trend, which I think we can push against, and that is that in places where that educational system is in place, the adult ed industry is booming. Because when people hit 35 or 40, they go, oh my goodness, I want this. I want something different. It's really, you can see the trend demographically. It's fascinating to watch. We are continuing to say, as a result of liberal arts, that we need to do more of this when folks are young. What's different, and I think this is related to what I'm about to say about what we might do together, is that the world in which we are trying to integrate, the world in which we say, by the way, it's both Aristotle and aerospace engineering, is shifting dramatically. It's more likely that every single one of the folks in this room who is getting a degree now will have 2, 3, 4 jobs. Not just one. It's more likely that every single one of those folks will probably have 2 or 3 jobs together, put together simultaneously. The narrative that folks need to tell about their lives has to be more than an accumulation of those expertises. And the reason for that is because as you move into the job market, as you move into thinking about what you do with your life, you're going to be able to create an account about your life that is better for you, better for the people listening to you, and better for the world. That's what integration means. If you graduate with a sense that you have these expertises, but no idea of how those expertises fit into the world, and no confidence to begin to explore how that happens, then we will not have done our job as educators. So thinking about this move between pre-major and major, one of the things that we've just appointed is a wonderful task force, called the Advising Task Force. And what we're doing is building on a couple of studies that we've already done at Duke around academic engagement. And the intellectual climate report was incredibly helpful for people on this very question. And what that study showed, it was done by Steve Basham, and he is going to be heading up the task force. We're very excited about that. We're going to be doing deeper studies on this question, is that student contentment, student sense of vitality and hope was directly correlated with their level of academic engagement, which is not connected to performance. Right? It was how engaged were you in the class. That had to do with the questions that you found interesting, with the way in which the knowledge that you were learning in that class fit into the world, the way that you felt that there was a mentoring relationship with you and the professor. It's a very important thing, and students actually did a lot of other things less as a result. They engaged in destructive drinking less when there was a higher level of academic engagement. I think this is also true for athletes, by the way. I think that the more you have a sense of athletic engagement, which doesn't mean that you're, on the basketball team, the more you are going to feel that you fit in your forms of knowledge. So that task force is just starting. We literally named it all last week. We're going to move forward to think about what would it look like to have reflection about and use the advising system as reflection about our education over the course of all 4 years. That might mean that you have the same person. We don't know yet. We're all just throwing it up and thinking about it in new ways. It might mean that you have an idea of the major as a gateway to life and not just as a track to get you a job. Again, I want to not create a binary here. I think it's really important that we think about tracks and jobs, but that it remains something that's holistic rather than only unit-focused or single-focused. The second thing that we are thinking about, and this is an idea that is just the beginning of an idea, what would it look like to have an official way, and here I'd love your thoughts about this, where students could put the work that they do together? Might be an honors college. Might be a place where we have a seminar where people who are double majors or majors and minors could integrate the two pieces in a series of reflections. What would it look like to begin to think about the aims of education, not just in an address at your freshman year, but think about it throughout all of your college careers, so that there were a series of events that students were even required to go to. I know, if you create a requirement, it's where good ideas go to die. So I'm reluctant to do that for any number of reasons. But what about, what would it look like for, tell me your name? Izzy, what's your major? Neuroscience and space. Neuroscience and Spanish. What would it look like for Izzy? I know she wants to answer the question, what would you do if you put them both together? To spend the time beginning her freshman year thinking about putting her interests together. They could be completely different than neuroscience and Spanish originally. But by the time her senior year comes along, she's used to putting those two things together. She's been asked to do that in a completely different way. I think that would be really transformative. So those are two big ideas. And I think there are many, many others. I'll just end with those because I know we want to have some time to talk. Another thing that I want to remind you of that's really interesting is that if you look at people's first majors, right, then we have a trend where we have mostly, well, not mostly, but a lot more social science, and then humanities. If you look at people's both majors together, their second major, what some students I've heard call the passion major, like the one that you really want to do, rather than the one that's going to get you tough. It's 33, 33, 33. It's fascinating. So what does that tell us about kind of the lives that we're living in now? So I'll end with that. Don't forget your assignment existentially is to both email me, I am slow but slavishly reliable, on email. Your question, if you don't have one, you need one. And we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much.
Not just questions.